Among the several curious and unhappy legacies in Western civilization of those centuries nearest to us are the systems of capitalism and the beliefs in rationalism and science. But perhaps, in some sense of the term legacy is inappropriate, not the least for its suggestions of fatality, or none of these has passed away. Capitalism, rationalism, and scientism are not merely forms of activity in parentheses production and reflexives of that activity, each became monumentous historical forces, providing substantially the character of the present industrial world, its character, but not necessarily its historical direction. This has been, of course, a frustrating disappointment to some, particularly those who believed that through the movement of capitalism they had discovered the nature that is the basis for historical change. Capitalism ain't gonna change it. That's what that's saying to me. For them, perhaps the most disturbing social phenomenon of our time is the re emergence of ideology, what Marx called partial consciousness. It to its pre scientific, pre rational prominence in the affairs of humankind. Ideology, especially in the 20th century, had come to play a discordant role within the body of modern social thought, somewhat akin to that which slavery assumed among the rationalistic analytical frameworks concomitant to the rise of capitalism. Ideology simply is a negation of those strains of contemporary social inquiry that have become dominant. Its intrusions in our century and the one that preceded have helped to absorb these social and historical processes, believed to be necessary and inevitable, have catalyzed rebellions and revolutions in often unlikely circumstances and among unlikely peoples, and have assisted in extraordinary historical achievement where failure was objectively imminent. As an ally of historical forces only poorly understood, ideology has exposed Western thought, both in its form as mechanical Marxism for its reductionism, and in an entirely different way, liberal thought for its reifications. The limits of Western radicalism, as demonstrated in Marxist theory, the most sustained critique of the modern era, are endemic to Western civilization, meaning Marxism only critiques is only situated within the West, so it's limited to the Western constraints of thought, which are based off of whereas it's not going to fully encompass third world black indigenous people and their thought and their critique in a sense, or their opposite lives, their opposite ways and values, and that's what that's like indicating to me already. Those limitations relate directly to the understanding, quote unquote, of consciousness and the persistence of racialism in the Western thought as a primary importance. Because Western critique is like it won't typically acknowledge the racism embedded within the West. It would have been exceedingly difficult and most likely that such a civilization in its ascendancy as a significant power in the world would produce a tradition of self-examination sufficiently critical to expose one of its most profound terms of order, racialism, but they didn't. Racialism, as I have tried to show, ran deep in the bowels of Western culture, negating its very social relations of production and distorting their inherent contradiction. The comprehension of the particular configuration of racial Sorry, sometimes I need to shake my head because it's too many thoughts. The comprehension of the particular configuration of racist ideology in Western culture has been pursued historically through the successive eras of violent domination and social extraction that directly involved European peoples during the better part of the 2 millennia. Racialism insinuated not only medieval, feudal, and capitalist social structures, forms of property, and modes of production. Like racism is embedded. Embedded. That's what that's saying. So Western critique is still embedded with racism, like Marx. They're saying he's still embedded with racism. He won't even acknowledge it. But racism, racialism. Okay. But as well, the very values of the traditions of consciousness through which the peoples of these ages came to understand their world and their experiences. Western culture constituting the structure from which European consciousness was appropriated, the structure in which, oh my god, I'm highlighting this whole entire page, but it helps me to highlight so what I'm reading, bro. I swear. Identities, European consciousness was appropriated, the structures in which social identities and perceptions were grounded in the past, transmitted a racialism that adapted to the political and material exigencies of the moment. In the medieval and feudal social orders of the European hinterland and the Mediterranean, racialism was substantiated by specific sets of exploitation through which particular caste or class exploited and expropriated disparate peoples. At the very beginnings of European civilization, meaning literally the reappearance of urban life at the end of the first Christian millennium, the integration of the Germanic migrants with older European peoples resulted in a social order of domination from which a racial theory of order emerged, one from which the medieval nobilities would immerse themselves and their power in the fictional histories, positing distinct racial origins for rulers, saying, and the dominated. The extension of slavery and the application of racism to non-European peoples as an organizing structure by first the ruling feudal strata, then the bourgeoisies of the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries retained this practical habit, the social convention. And as we shall soon see in part 2, from the 7th century on, English merchant capital, to cite an important example, incorporated African labor in precisely these terms. That is, the same terms through which it had earlier absorbed Irish labor. That's why we hear that saying Irish people were the first black people, because what they did to black people, African people, they did to the Irish first in their own land. And that's why the Irish are so gung-ho about Palestine, because they were like, no, y'all did it first to us. And we're seeing it again. Delicious. Moreover, European racialism was to undergo a kind of doubling onto itself. For in between the era of intra-European racism that characterized the first appearance of European consciousness and the predatory era of African enslavement is the almost entirely exogenous phenomenon of Islamic domination of the Mediterranean. The eventual font of European revitalization and re-civilization, independent of the historical meshing of European development, but profoundly restricting that development. First, in literally retarding, European social development by isolating it from civil life, science, speculative thought, and so on. And then, after 4 centuries, by accelerating its recovery from the 12th century onward. Muslim civilization mapped the contours of European cultural renaissance. These events were to leave telltale marks on Western consciousness, the fear and hatred of blackamoors and the dehumanization of Islam, the transfiguration of Muhammad the Prophet into Antichrist. Not surprisingly, Europeans that is Christendom, still experienced reoccurrence of apathy, antipathy towards what becomes their shared oh Lord. I know we went over this word before too. Bum 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 bum. Ba-dum ba-dum. Oh.
Phantasmagoria.
Phantasmagoria, meaning a sequence of real or imaginary images like those seen in a dream.
Phantasmagoria.
Phantasmagoria. In short, there are at least 4 distinct moments that must be apprehended in European racialism. Those origins are to be found within the, I had to burp, dialectic of European development, and 2 are not. Number 1, the racial ordering of European society from its formative period, which extends into the medieval and feudal ages as blood, and racial beliefs and legends. 2, the Islamic, i.e., Arab, Persian, Turkish, and African domination of Mediterranean civilization and the consequent retarding of European social and cultural life, the Dark Ages. 3, the incorporation of African, Asian, and peoples of the New World into the world system emerging from late feudalism and merchant capitalism. And then 4, the dialectic of colonialism, plantocratic slavery, and resistance from the 16th century forward, and the formations of industrial labor and labor reserves. It is now a convention to begin the analysis of racism in Western societies with the third moment, entirely ignoring the first and second and only partially coming to terms with the fourth. As we shall observe in the next section of this study, the results have been rather bizarre. Some students of racism have happily reiterated the premise of a sort of mass psychology of chromatic trauma in which European reactions to darker-skinned people are seen as natural. Others, include Marxists, have argued for a simplistic empiricism where the inevitable consequences of slavery and domination are the rationalizations of racial superiority and inferiority. In each instance, the root of the methodological and conceptual flaws are the same. The presumption, we're almost done, that the social and historical processes that matter, which are determinative, are European. All else, it seems, is derivative. On this score, the preoccupation of Western racialism with capitalism, the preoccupation of Western radicalism with capitalism as a system has served the same purpose. Marxists have often argued that national liberation movements in the third world are secondary to the interests of the industrial proletariat. That's like right now when we want to ignore black and brown people, indigenous people that have been screaming, being like, hey y'all, like right now with the Amazonian people that are talking about they're trying to deforestation, and then no one's listening, but the global warming's warming it. Florida's being flooded. But no, we're gonna do it the French way. Why don't we listen to black and brown? Why don't we listen to indigenous people? This is a calling for myself as well, because I'm like, oh, you know what? Have I been listening? Have I heard? Are my ears open? You know, it's a calling for all of us. Black, brown, queer women. Working class, third world. Right. But this is what they're saying, that Marx was like, nah, we listening to the French. What they gotta do with anything? They still racist. They don't care. Nah, that was not the best example. I wish I can go back and edit, but I don't care. Okay. Marxists have often argued that national liberation movements in the third world are secondary to the interests of the industrial proletariat in the capitalist metropoles, or that they needed to be understood only as a social efflux of world capitalism. Such movements require fitting into the margins of the model for socialist revolution. And what Cedric Robinson does is like, we're bringing the margins to the front, baby, because who gives you the right? Who gives you the right to be like black and brown women? We don't want to listen to you. Black and brown people, we don't want to listen to you. Third world people, we don't want to listen to you. Indigenous people, we don't want to listen. Who gives you the right to say that? When they know what's up, they've been screaming for years what's up. They've been knowing what's up, and we've been ignoring them. So let's open our ears, close our mouths, shut up, and listen, and take action. Calling for myself as well. Such movements require Such movements require fitting. What is least defensible, though, is how scant the attention paid to intra-European racialism has been, and they ignore the racism within themselves. They're like, no, we can have a revolution, but within the existing orders, social structures, social whatever. We have now given consideration to the first moment of European racialism. It is time to explore the other three. This we shall do, but with a difference. History will no longer be left to revolve around European peoples or to originate from Europe as its center. In part 2, in particular, respecting African peoples and the African diaspora, we will explore the foundations of the modern era as they have forged or enhanced by the activities of other peoples. In focusing on the history of the struggle of black peoples for a different social order, we will, of course, be reminded again of the limitations of Western radicalism. But, more importantly, we shall be preparing ourselves for a more profound understanding of the black radical tradition. When in turn we have concluded the preparation, we shall then examine the pioneering effect of black radical theorists. This, too, will provide us with some insight into the problems of Western radicalism. On the basis of part 3 will be the thought of three black ideologists, Du Bois, James, and Wright, who become the consciousness of their positions and that of black struggles in Western civilization and thought. Their attempts to reconcile their social consciousness on the priorities of historical materialism has led to a critique of the very tradition in which they sought relief, and finally to a black radical consciousness. Most important, however, is their eventual encounter with the black radical tradition. The result was the first theoretical articulation of a revolutionary tradition whose nature was founded, whose nature was founded on a very different historical role for consciousness than was anticipated in Western radicalism. The object in forming the study is to synthesize the elements of that emergent black tradition into a coherent schema so that its remarkable insights and historical project might assume more authentic significance. Part 2, the roots of black radical. Let me read the sentence. The roots of black radicalism. Okay, I'm gonna post these and then we're gonna get into it. I'm so excited. Okay, now we're done with the boring stuff.